You are listening to the Smart Betting Club podcast with me, your host, Peter Ling. For the very latest on what it takes to make your betting profitable, including the experts you should follow, please visit the SBC website at smartbettingclub.com. In today's podcast, I spoke with Wayne from the very successful Northern Monkey Punter racing tipster service on the secrets behind his betting success over several years. Wayne walked me through his approach to profits through advising a mixture of singles and multiple bets on horse racing and the winning record he has built up since 2010. We also explore the work involved in bet selection, from watching videos to form study, and just how he juggles running the service with a full-time job. Also on the agenda, we discuss his work as a racing journalist, how that has helped inform his betting, and his insight into the challenges facing racing with topics such as bookmaker restrictions and affordability checks. If you enjoyed today's episode and this series of interviews with betting experts, please be sure to leave a review wherever you download your podcasts. In today's podcast, I am joined by Wayne from the Northern Monkey Punter service. Welcome to the pod, Wayne.
Hi, Pete. How are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast so I can ask you all kinds of questions about you and your service. Now, you run a Hall of Fame rated tipster service at Northern Monkey Punter. So, there's probably a good number of SBC members familiar with you and your service. But for those who aren't, do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself and what it is you do?
Yeah, so I've run Northern Monkey Punter since 2010. I've run it around a full-time job. It's predominantly a horse racing service. I've dabbled a little bit in football, and I like to send out a little bit for Eurovision every year, which is a bit of a novelty thing on the side. But yeah, horse racing's the bread and butter of the service. Sending tips daily, although most of our activity tends to fall on around the weekends and the main festivals, especially during the summer. And flat racing is very much the focus of the service. Do really like to get stuck into Cheltenham in the spring, but flat racing is really what makes me tick, especially the sprint races in the summer. Being Hall of Fame rated for quite a while, in and out at one point. But yeah, it's we're in the thick of the season now. So this year's not been it's not been fantastic so far. We're just hovering around breaking even at the minute. But normally we experience a purple patch during the summer, so just hoping things click into place really this year and we can have our traditional hot winning run in the summer.
Everyone's looking forward to that, yeah. And that's part of you've got the longevity of the service where, you might have a flat period as you've got now, a quiet period, but people can look at the historical record and say, well, this is quite normal, isn't it, to have a lull like that. And then all of a sudden you maybe have a few days where everything clicks together and things look a little bit different.
Yeah, it's bizarre really how it falls, and it's all variance really, isn't it? And it makes it frustrating sometimes, especially when you've got new members coming on board and you'd like to make a good impression with any new member that comes on board. But sometimes they can just join at the wrong time, and they might have a month, sometimes a couple of months where there's not really much happening, and you're hoping that things are going to click into place. But sometimes on the flip side, you get people that join right at the crest of the wave and have a barnstorming period when they first join. So yeah, it's part and parcel of it. Like you say, you do your research, and from the SBC's point of view, you do like all the drawdown calculations and things, and calculating the betting bank size, which you recommend to follow the service. So hopefully those losing runs get picked up. But yeah, all the same, you're always hoping that members kick off on a winning note.
I suppose there's danger in both sides, isn't there? Someone joins at the onset, like at the crest of a wave, and suddenly, they might get the wrong impression that it's always going to be like that, and then maybe overstake, and then you get people who join, at different points in time where maybe they start to lose money, etc. That they think like, oh, well, what am I bothering? So how do you juggle that? How do you deal with the pressures of being a tipster and expectations from people that perhaps a little bit out of sync at times?
Yeah, I think it just comes with experience really, and sadly sometimes you can't retain certain members. If they've joined. For me, I usually have a really good Cheltenham. Like this year and last year, I've made 40 points profit roughly off the top of my head. It's always been a golden period for me as Cheltenham. I always tend to do well, and then off the back of that, you get a flurry of new sign-ups for the new season. But I try and put this in the literature on my service website that the start of the flat season I find quite tricky. Traditionally, you get wet weather and you've got horses that have not run on the flat since, October, November the previous year. And I do tend to have a quiet spell at the start, and it's only really going into the summer that the results tend to pick up. But it can vary from year to year. Sometimes May has been the month when it's kicked in. Other years it's been June. Some years I've had a really bad ascot and been sort of limping along a bit into July, and then things have clicked into place. This year we're still waiting for it to click into place, although we didn't do the usual. I'd normally have a bit of a destructive ascot. I mean, last year was an exception because I had a really good win off one of my own horses that I've got a syndicate share in, Dandala. She won the Albany Stakes at Royal Ascot. Won I think it was about 50 points on record for the members. So we've pretty much won our betting bank for the year going into the middle of the summer. Normally we don't do so well at Ascot. I don't know what it is about it. So yeah, we're just you just got to assess it as you're going along, really, I think, and just try and keep faith with what you're doing. From my point of view, I try not to be distracted. Naturally, you're going to be getting feedback from members. Sometimes some are more vocal than others. I mean, most of my members come through the SBC and they're well educated and they're quite happy just to let me get on with it. But from time to time, you do get a couple of abusive runs and people asking, what's going on. I'm losing lots of money following your tips. And it does add on extra pressure. I feel it more than I would do if I was just following the bets out of my own pocket, and that adds the extra bit of pressure. But it's just part and parcel of it. You've got to take the rough with the smooth, and when things are going well and you're getting congratulatory emails and people are telling you what they've won on multiples, which has often happened around Cheltenham and stuff, you're happy to take the praise then. So you've got to prepare to take a bit of criticism when things aren't going so well, which inevitably they're going to hit a rocky spell at some time. The same with any service, really.
And your approach then, let's get into that, because you do bet most days, and obviously you bet a little bit more during the festivals and the weekend meetings, when the higher profile meetings are taking place. And it's a mixture of singles and multiples, isn't it? And those multiples are obviously where, that variance does really kick in, because, you can make significant profits, and you have done in the past. But that's just the nature of taking multiple bets, isn't it? That it's that high risk, high reward approach.
Yeah, I mean, I try and say to members that my aim is to make the singles like the bread and butter, if you like, of the service. And I think if your singles are making a good, healthy profit over the course of the year, then you need a bit of luck with the multiples. But if your singles are not proving profitable, then it's going to cause more issues with your multiples. I mean, with multiples, you're trying to line up two or more winners in the same bet, and they're not directly related each outcome. So it's just, again, it comes down to variance, and you can have some agonising near misses and things. But I mean, yes, when I was first learning betting, I remember travelling up to Edinburgh one weekend with the missus, and we were supposedly going for like a nice sightseeing weekend. And I ended up sloping off into Waterstones and got a book about betting systems. This was when I was a bit wet behind the ears. I wasn't running the service at the time. This was before the kids arrived and things. And there was a phrase in that book which always stuck with me, and it was that singles are the key to the layers safe. And that's the sort of the philosophy that I tried to build the service on. And in the early years, I very rarely advised multiples. I was very much under the impression that, multis are for mugs, which is a phrase you often hear trotted out. It was only really probably about 5 or 6 years ago that my attitude to it changed. I think it's like a lot of things. Unless you've experienced a winner using a certain method or approach, you're a bit sceptical of it. And until recently, I was employed as a horse racing journalist, so I worked on a horse racing desk with quite a lot of gamblers. And one of my colleagues, he was involved. He got wind of the Barney Curley multi. I think it was probably one of the last ones he landed. So I think Sophie Leach might have trained one of the horses. A bit, can't remember exactly now, but yeah, and he won loads off it, and it kind of opened my eyes a bit. And it was like, oh, so people can actually win from this approach. And then sort of over the years, the way the bookmakers operate now, it's sort of been a little bit harder to get bets on. Accounts have got restricted or closed down. And sometimes I found that you can get bets on by combining a bet that you like in a multiple rather than just doing it as a single, and you can get your higher potential returns that way. So that's kind of how I sort of started more actively betting on multiples. Sort of, if I was getting knocked back to a stake of £10 or £20 on a single on one at 10-1, and I was hoping for more, I'd slip it in with a short price football bet or something like that. It can get messy doing that because, of course, if your first leg of the bet loses, then you've not got anything rolling on at all onto the second leg. But I mean, over the years, I tried then to implement it onto the service, and it was very much a mixed reception from members. Some members absolutely hate the multiple approach, whereas others absolutely love it. It gives them the chance to win big off small stakes. So I started then to split off in my results spreadsheet the profit and loss for the multiples and the singles, so I could run a comparison for each. And, for the first couple of years, we had a couple of near misses. We never really managed to land one on the service. But then in subsequent years, we have had some good multiples, and they've sort of papered over the cracks sometimes when the singles have wobbled. When Withhold won the Cesarovic a few years ago for Roger Charlton, we had Withhold at 25-1, and he was subject to a massive plunge on the day. I mean, Tony Bloom, who owns him, he's the chairman of Brighton Football Club, and I think he possibly might be involved in poker. I'm not really.
Oh yeah, he's Tony Bloom is he's got involved. Is it Star Lizard?
Is it?
I think it's his syndicate, I believe. Yeah, I get him confused with the guy who runs Matchbook sometimes. Matthew Benham.
Yeah, he's a pretty big gambler, isn't he? And I mean, a lot of the gamble that day, I've no doubt it was due to Tony Bloom smashing his horse to pieces. But in terms of the number of members I had on board then and the amount of stakes, I mean, we were talking about a profit of about 50 points each off that horse. I mean, I suppose a lot depends on what you would guess the average stake would be for members following. But I mean, even if you were talking 20, 30 quid a point or something like that, even if you've got, say, 100 members, which I had more than that at the time, all winning 50 points, it would have been a big liability for some of the firms. I had another good multiple with Foxtrot Lady at Newmarket a couple of years ago as well. She won about 50 points. A couple of other ones. Tin Man was a good win on the service. I mean, that was actually about 30 points, I think it was, on record. But personally, I did really well out of that because I'd mixed it in with some both teams to score football bets, which I told the story to my members a while ago. That was my biggest ever personal win. And it helped me put down a bigger deposit on our house, really. That was it was a turning point as well, because from that point on, this was about 2016 it was, I've kind of dropped my stakes off since then and decided to cash in a lot of my betting bank that I had up to that point and use it for a purpose. And I mean, it coincided nicely that, a lot of my accounts had been restricted or some had been shut down completely by then. So yeah, I'm sure we'll probably get onto the topic of restrictions later, but yeah, that's sort of how I've moved along with the times. But yeah, multiples very much split opinion still to this day. And, it's like I've seen you reviewing the new multiple service that's doing really well, isn't it? And hitting a good return on investment that you've been reviewing. And so there's definitely a market out there, but, there's a lot of traditional punters as well that just prefer to chip away and generate that steady profit from the singles.
Yeah, so my experience is that obviously the multiple approach is lucrative as long as you've got value on the bets within it, and like I say, it's a great way to kind of cover your tracks if you're profitable to a certain extent or get more on. I had Anthony Kaminskis on a recent podcast, and he was talking about how variance is your friend when it comes to account longevity. And so by taking, say, multiples, I'm sure you know this, you might have 20 accounts and 18 of them are loss making, but the two that are winning are significantly making more than you've lost on the other 18. So it helps with that longevity. But I guess it goes to the type of punter and how they like to bet, because, I think when I was starting out, the multiple side of it would really test my bank and my patience. So it's kind of like, I always feel it's choosing a tipster or a strategy that fits in with your risk profile as much as your bank. Because you don't want to be following something that's going to have lots of long losing runs if you're not ready to cope with that or set up or experienced enough. So yeah, you mentioned quite a few other topics there. I wanted to ask you about the journalism, because that's just a note I'd made, because you were previously running Northern Monkey alongside working as a journalist. How did that work as a journalist help you, if at all, with either both the tipping and the betting side of things?
I think it increased my knowledge of the sport a great deal. I was surrounded by like-minded individuals and learnt bits. When I joined the company, I was working for a press agency providing daily horse racing content. So we used to write tipping previews, which you'd see on Odds Checker and at the races. We used to do race cards and if you look at Sporting Life and at the races, they have like a form comment for every runner after each race has been run. We used to do those live. So it got me good experience at watching races, I think, more than anything. And that's sort of what I've tried to carry into my service, that, nowadays there's a lot of form databases out there and things. And I don't think you necessarily have to be that clued up on horse racing. If you're very adept at working with systems and numbers, and you know what's significant, and you can weave certain mathematical means into your betting, you can make it pay without actually understanding or necessarily watching the racing. But my view is that, well, if anyone can do that, then the potential edge that you might have in your selections is going to get ebbed away sooner. So my sort of approach, a lot of it, I mean, I do rely on some stats, don't get me wrong, and some of my selections are stats based, but I try and derive a lot of my bets through watching videos, because my view is that if you see an eye catcher, a horse that flies home from the back of the field, meets a bit of trouble, finishes well into fourth or fifth, there are going to be some other people that spot it naturally, because nowadays everyone's got access to the racing post, and if they pay a little bit extra and get the replays, they can. But some punters they won't take the effort to actually watch those replays. I mean, in the past, people who watched back form replays like that had a greater edge, because you would have had to do it on like a Sky Plus box or something like that. Now, they are readily available on the internet, and I think it has become harder to get an edge, especially with the way that, in terms of the bookmakers pricing up the betting markets early. We've even got like William Hill pricing up races 2 days in advance now, which when I first started in 2010 running the service, that never happened. The first prices would come out maybe the night before, and even then you were looking at maybe 3 or 4 firms. You'd like Bet Victor, Bet365 were the main one, maybe like Ladbrokes. Whereas nowadays you've got William Hill pricing up 2 days in advance, and to my eye, a lot of their prices very closely resemble a commercial betting forecast that you can find on Sporting Life. So I don't even think they employ traders anymore to put up those early prices. I think from their point of view, they're saving on trader salaries by doing that. They put out those embryonic prices, if you like. There's not much competition 2 days before the race, unless it's like a main weekend anti-post race. But I mean more in terms of just like the midweek handicaps, say an average track like a Catterick or a Sedgefield or something like that. And they put up certain prices, and they're probably putting in low limits. The punters that notice any pricing errors in those early markets, they'll soon knock the errors out of the market without the firm absorbing too many liabilities that are too hefty. And then the next day, they've now got potentially, 48 hours before the race is being run to iron out any mistakes to avoid getting filled in. And it's only really sort of on the mornings that I would ideally like to bet. Some of the big weekend races and things like that, where you've got a more mature market, I think you're fine to bet the night before or even after the final decks if there's been like a decent anti-post market and everyone's priced it up. But yeah, it's just the way that the game's changed over time, I suppose, and you've just got to accept that. Whereas before you might have had a 10% edge or whatever, you might only have an 8% edge or 7% edge, whatever. Now it's just parcel of it, I suppose.
I can't imagine, like I say, they're taking too much on those bets 2 days beforehand. The liabilities are quite low, and
yeah,
even if you were to strike some, good bets or bets that shorten in price, your account might be flagged, and you could be done quite quickly. And I wanted to touch on one point you mentioned there about watching video, and I wanted to explore and understand more about your kind of approach and how you find value and the work you put in. Can you just walk me through that? Like, what does it look like? Is it a lot of study in the evening and a lot of race watching and making notes? How do you basically eke out value from your bets?
Yeah, so I mean, when I was working in racing, which was until May this year, so 10 years prior to that, I was watching pretty much every race every day. I suppose in the last 12 months, the nature of the job at the company I was working for changed, and we were sidetracked on a separate projects during the day, and we weren't necessarily able to watch all of the racing live. But when I was able to watch it, I could jot down a couple of horses during the day that had taken my eye, or ones that had won, and I thought they were good value for the greater than the winning margin. But I mean, nowadays, and maybe for the last 18 months or so, most of my study just gets done on the night. So I mean, I get up pretty early. I've got 3 kids to take to school, so that's pretty hectic. And, in years gone by when they were younger, I used to get up and I would do some study in the morning. So you're obviously looking for overnight going changes, which not a thing over the winter when you're betting on the all weather, because the track can either ride fast or slow, but there's not really that much variability. I don't tend to bet much on the jump, so that was never an issue. But during the flat season, as everyone knows, if you've got a hot, dry spell, you can suddenly get buckets of rain. And we had it at Ascot the other week. The ground had turned from good to firm to heavy in less than 24 hours. So you've got to look at those sort of things at the last minute. And also, as much as it's important to check the going changes for the horses that you're looking to back, it's looking at if there's any knock-on effects in terms of non-runners. So if I'm backing a horse that likes to be dropped in at the back of the field and he's going to be played late, in an ideal world, I'd like 2 front runners to tear off fast in that race, take each other on, set strong fractions early, which are unsustainable. They fall into a hole late on, and then the horses towards the back of the field come late and pick up the pieces. And if the soft going change renders one of those non-runners out of the race, then it can change the whole complexion of the race. So, I mean, I still have to check for that now, because you don't want to be sending out bets after those going changes have come into play. But nearly all my research is done on a night, so I'll sit down once the kids have gone to bed, probably maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock-ish if I'm lucky. Sometimes it might be 9, and then just work through. So, I mean, there have been times in the past, especially around the main festivals and in the lead up to Cheltenham, where I'd be working till 1 or 2 in the morning, and for me, I'd just get on with it and get a can of Red Bull down me the next morning and be lagging a bit. But I was happy to do it around Cheltenham because you've got whatever it is, 30 odd races. And I feel like you've got to put the effort in and to feel the rewards. And thankfully, I've been rewarded over the years. Nowadays, because I'm up a lot earlier, I have to set off for work at 7:30 in my newer job. And then it has become a bit of a hindrance at times. I mean, luckily, during the midweek, I don't tend to have that many bets of interest, because during the early stages of the week, the racing's lower grade, smaller field sizes, it's at the lesser tracks, and just naturally from that, I don't tend to have as many bets. But if I do have any bets to send out now, I have to find a strategic place to pull over on the roadside. I pre-draft everything the night before, and then I'll check for like overnight going changes and things when I get up. But I don't actively research any new bets in the morning. In an ideal world, I like to send the bets at 8:30, but I start work at 8:45. So a lot depends on how bad the traffic is on the morning. And sometimes I've had times where I've pulled up a little bit early to send the bets out. Other times I've had a clear run and I've been sending it right near the premises, before I get into work and I'm due to start. Because once I start, I don't have access to any gambling sites or anything now. So it's completely done in my own time, and I can't watch the races like I did before, which it does mean I'm going to have to use a bit more holiday going forward when it comes to Cheltenham, because I don't want to be watching those races live. But yeah, for the best part, like in terms of the midweek stuff, it's not a problem, and I can watch everything that I need to on a night. I tend to mainly focus on sprint handicaps anyway, because they're the races that interest me. So in terms of a normal mundane weekday, I probably only have 2 or 3 races to look at, really. And sometimes if you've got like a York meeting, like at the Dante or Chester or a Glorious Goodwood or an Ascot or something like that, then I'll have a few more to study and catch up on. But yeah, it's just about planning it, really, and making sure that you know in advance where you're going to have those busy periods. And if you've got like any social functions or anything like that, because you're fitting it around a job and bringing up a family, you've got to be well prepared and just think on in advance. So 48-hour declarations are a godsend in that regard. So if you know you're going out on Friday, you can have a look on Thursday and get a good heads up on, without seeing necessarily the prices, but you can see the races and the forecast prices and try and get a good idea on, who's running. Like, I know a lot of punters are different, but I keep like a list of horses that I've followed that have gone close, in a horse tracker. As soon as the declarations come through, I get a list for horses that have been entered and then declared. They're sort of like the key ones that I don't want to miss. And then if there's any quiet days or there's some other particularly good races that are coming up, I'll sit down and tackle those races from the start without having any horses that have gone close to me in the past, and just looking to see if there's a way into those races from afresh.
So you've been doing this since 2010 in terms of a service. I presume nowadays you feel like you expedite the process, whether you've got the lists that you keep or the eye catchers. Do you feel that that's the more you have done this, the quicker you get at it, or do you still find you have to put the hours in as much now as you did, back when you first started doing this?
I'd say you still have to put in the hours, although in some respects I have sort of taken a not necessarily shortcuts. It's just that when I first started, I used to map out the races. So I used to do like pace maps and look at where the front runners were coming from in the races, from what stalls, and where the hold up horses were coming from. So I could play out a race in my mind, how I thought a race would be structured. And for me, I think that was a big angle for me in 2010, which was a really good year for me. I made a really handsome triple figure profit in the first year. But then over the years, other punters have sort of leaked that approach in terms of generating pace maps. It's quite big in America. You see it on like some of the time form content they produce. And then the races started to do it for Royal Ascot. And now you've got like databases like Proform, which produce pace maps for every race. So something like that, the angle that I had a lot of success back in front runners. You could back them at double figure prices in races where you thought they'd get an easy lead. And not always, sometimes they get collared and reeled in by the rest of the field. But at certain tracks, at certain times, you were backing them at big prices and they could slip the field and win. But nowadays, because of, like I say, databases like Proform, you don't even need to really understand the races. You can follow systems that have been pre-generated and that you can follow, or you quickly stumble across them through research using the form filters on that database, and you'd find examples of horses like this. And there's a lot of people doing back to lay bets, so they'll back it high before the race at say 10-1 and look to lay it off in running at 5-1 if it's going to go shorter, and just lock in that potential for a free bet. So times like that, it's harder to make a profit on those sorts of bets now. But at the same time, I can still use those pace maps to save me having to do them. So something like that is something that I've been able to absorb from other sites, but I have to pay to access them, obviously. But in terms of the other stuff, like the actual putting in the hours watching the videos, there's no shortcuts to that, really. If I had more of a stats-based approach and looked to develop some statistical systems, then I suppose that is a quicker way of betting and stuff. But that would take away some of the enjoyment for me. Like when I'm sending out the bets and stuff, I don't really like to just send the name of a horse and the time of the race and the track that it's running in. I like to provide a bit of reasoning as to why I like the horse. The more I've looked at the replays and things and built up a case for why, in my head, why I like him. If I have time, I try and relay that case on through the email to people rather than just sending a list of horses and race times.
Yeah, well, certainly the impression that I have and many members will be aware of is there's a lot of detail that goes into your service. So the listener might have the wrong idea and you think about you pulling over on the side of the road to send an email. Actually, often you wouldn't know that. You would not know that, Wayne. I'm always impressed. And when I was researching, doing the podcast with you, I thought, how does Wayne juggle all of this? And I understand, it's about being structured and organised, and you obviously having the experience of how to oversee the service, plus the fact that the main bulk of the work comes on the weekend. So from what you're saying there, though, it's constant evolution, isn't it? And you need to adapt as maybe some of the information that you've relied upon becomes more common. Or your website start to offer it, because there's one school of thought that does have the horse racing world a little bit backward, in terms of that, where it like sectional time, and there's a resistance to that kind of information. But there is enough people out there using it who are kind of invested in the data that are actually kind of making the markets that much more efficient. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of sectional timings, yeah. And I think that is why it isn't commonly used over here, because there is an edge into it. I mean, I haven't done it this year, well, not since the pandemic really, but I did subscribe to some of the Timeform sectional archive offerings, which Simon Rowlands was one of the key men in putting towards. And I think that was about £100 for like 3 months. So you're looking at like 400 quid for the year. I think that was just for the flat. But it's like, if I'd have stumbled across sectional times and saw a huge way into it. I wouldn't publicly make the information public.
No.
You mind that angle until it goes. Like you say, something that's worked in the past will always work in the future. I mean, I talked about like certain statistical systems and things you can use to bet, and I had one a few years ago that was I used to back Mark Johnston horses, and it was in July round now because that's when you tend to get fast ground. And I used to back ones that were 3-year-old taking on older aged horses in handicaps because they get a weight for age allowance to reflect their immaturity when they're taking on older horses. It was through work, really. Me and my friend, we noticed that, Mark was really good at targeting certain races with this type of horse. And, to start with, not always with a short price. Nowadays, whenever you see a Mark Johnson 3-year-old taking on all the horses, it'll be 2-1 favourite, 5-2, especially if it's gone close on its last race. But back then, you could get some bigger prices. And I used to filter out the ones that had run well last time. And I used to look for ones that had weakened. If they'd finished out of the frame, that was even better. And that he was then stepping up in trip. So my perfect scenario would be a miler that weakened inside the final furlong, finished 6th or 7th, 9 or whatever, and then next time out, they're stepping up to 1 mile 2 or even 1 mile 4. And because a lot of the way that horse racing markets are priced, it's on the last time out form. Horses with a stronger form, recent form, they'll be shortest in the betting. Because they've got a 6 or a 7 next to the name, you're getting a decent price. And it might have been 2015, 2016-ish. We had a real golden spell and really cashed in from that system. It's not a system that has continued to be as profitable in recent years. And I think the reason for it is that things change. So in this regard, Mark Johnson doesn't do a lot of the training now. It's his son, Charlie. Even though Mark Johnson's name's on the licence, and presumably Charlie has a different input in the way that they're trained or in terms of the way that they're entered. But the strike rate in recent years has dropped off from what it used to be. And also, in terms of profitability, the edge that was there, it isn't there. So you can't just continue to follow systems blindly or certain approaches blindly. You've got to take a little bit of time out to analyse your methods, I think, and look at if they're still working as well as they have done in the past and be prepared to adapt, really, like we were saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I say, it's his name is still on the door, but it's his son, and obviously maybe things have changed. So it's constantly reevaluating and checking, like, are my methods still valid? That's certainly a message I hear from many people as I do these podcasts. You mentioned a couple of times in our conversation so far about your betting, and obviously you've had some purple patches in the past, but talk me through your own betting. How much of a role does that play? Presumably you're backing all the tips you put forward, and no doubt there's probably more bets you place. How much does the betting form in terms of, your overall kind of output alongside running the service, but how much does it basically provide for you?
Yeah, it pretty much mirrors my own main bets, if you like, because I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than backing a winner, and if you're in the middle of a losing run on the service, not having that profit, creeping into your results from the service. Sometimes it's not possible. You might, with my Northern Monkey Punter bets, I try and get them sent out in the morning before 8:30. In my old job, I used to sometimes send them late on a dinner time if there'd been a lot of racing. I was busy at work. I used to have that option to send out late bets and things during the day. Nowadays, I wouldn't send it. I would just don't have time to look during the day. So whatever gets sent in the morning, that's it. But yeah, it tend to just mirror my own bets. I mean, the only other difference is that I've got shares in about a dozen racehorses as part of the syndicates that I'm involved in, mostly with Nick Bradley Racing. And I sort of have a separate betting bank for those that I do for my service bets. A lot of overlap. And most of the horse bets that I tip up on the service, whenever any of my horses are running, I'll more often than not put them up on the service too. But there have been a couple of times where they've either, I've not put them up on the service for whatever reason. Because they're my horses, I'll have something on them every time they run, unless they've got absolutely no chance. Like I've got one running tomorrow, the Brazen one at Ripon in a cellar, and she's a lost cause, so I won't even have anything on her myself. But sometimes I'll just have like a cheeky fiver on one myself. So I've got a separate betting bank for my own horses. But like when I'm having like a big bang on any of my horses, those bets will be sent out on the service. And then in terms of like other sports, I do like I say, horse racing is the the bread and butter for Northern Monkey Punter, and I put up a few football anti-posts on the website for a bit of fun. They're more recreational bets, if you like. I'm talking, tenors and £20 bets that I don't keep a profit and loss record or anything for them. And then I follow a couple of football tipsters, other sports as well, golf, boxing. I've got friends that put up content on Sporting Life on for other sports which I follow. But yeah, like the other sports and things are more like recreational for me. And often it's like, if I've got a strong weekend fancy on Northern Monkey Punter, like my main weekend handicap selection, I'll combine that in multiples with these other sports, try and get some more roll-ups and try and boost the returns, especially on those accounts like we touched upon previously, where you've got limited opportunities to get singles on. It can sometimes slip through a few doubles to try and get you those bigger liabilities.
In terms of the people that follow Northern Monkey, what kind of profile are they? Are they, would you say they're medium punters, or have you got quite a few large stakers within your group? Because with your profitable record, I imagine you've attracted quite a diverse audience.
Yeah, I mean, I never ask the members specifically what they're betting, and if they share with me what they're betting, then great. So I've got a couple that told me they're following at £100 per point. So you feel quite a bit of pressure when you're going through a losing run if someone's following to that level. I mean, personally, I've never followed the bets above that level. Round about, I'd say 2014 was a golden period for the service. I had a column in a national newspaper, the Racing Plus, around that time, and I was sending out some bets which were, I was running a column in association with Proform, and the bets on the column that year, they were showing like a 67% return on investment to SP. I wasn't even settling them at advised prices or anything. It would have settled at the SP. So that actual year, in terms of the Northern Monkey bets, the bets I was sending out in the week, they weren't as profitable in the year into the profit that I generated from the big weekly selections. I stopped writing the column after a year because, I mean, it all started from nowhere, really. Because I was working in the industry as a journalist, we used to write content for this paper, and the newspaper, the Racing Plus, a sponsorship agreement with Proform, a farm database company, and they needed someone to write a column to fill the page. And I sort of like stumbled into it just because my boss at the time knew that I like to look at a few stats and stuff, win percentages and things like that for my own bets, and sort of asked me if I'd do it. And it just snowballed, really. And, they were asking me at the end of the year if I wanted to do like a telephone line tipping service, like that. I think they're a thing of the past now, aren't they? But you used, like Derek Thompson used to do, where you'd phone up and you'd get a minutes of, waffle, and then they'd finally deliver the tip. But yeah, I had to spurn their offer for it, really, because it was a conflict of interest between running Northern Monkey Punter and writing that column. So I gave that up after a year and passed on the responsibility of that to my colleague, and then I just run the service ever since.
Yeah, no, it's the telephone tipsters. It just made me chuckle because yes, they'd waffle for 5 minutes and then give you a 1 to 2 on favourite at the end of it, perhaps. And Derek Thompson was certainly one of those who was renowned for it. So I, for one, am pleased he turned that one down and continued to run Northern Monkey Punter. I'm sure there's many members the same. And in terms of getting your bets on, you talked about the rolling them up into doubles, etc. I guess that's a big issue for you as it is for your members, account closures, account restrictions. How do you cope with that? Is it, a mix of, trying to bet through intermediaries, shall we say, or betting on the exchanges? What's your approach?
I don't go on the exchanges at all, really. I did have a little spell where I was doing back to lays on front runners. I got a little bit carried away with it, and I just thought, no, it would distract me from what I was doing in terms of my normal bets and normal procedure and everything. So, I mean, over the years, like, I have lost accounts, and, without giving away too many details, I've got a couple of people that can put bets on for me. But generally, over the years, I've reduced my stakes. Like I say, I mean, the highest I've ever staked on my bets was £100 per point. These days, I'm around half that. In terms of the access to the accounts that I've got, I can get on what I want. It is a pain. It is a trouble on a weekend when you've got, say, like the other weekend I had 12 bets. And it's funny, whenever we go out for anywhere on a weekend, I ask the wife to drive, and I'm there in the passenger seat, often trying to get the bets on, just because it's got your limits, haven't you, on certain accounts. And even with the multiples, like, you think, well, multiples are seen as mug bets, you should be able to slip these bets on easily, but they don't. Like a lot of the accounts now, they'll limit me to like £1 Yankee or £1 Lucky 15. So then you're trying to find new accounts to get those on with and try find a shop. I mean, to be fair, the local shop to me, they're quite good. The staff in there, they know what they're doing. But sometimes if you're out and about and you're in another city or village, you get some real idiots that are working in the shops that don't have a clue, and you're asking them for a price on a certain race and they're telling you that none are available and stuff. And God help you if you're trying to get your stakes back on a anti-post runner that's been balloted out and things. A lot of them just aren't properly trained and know the rules. So I don't like going in shops.
I think it's something you either enjoy or you invested in or not, from my understanding. Talking to people who bet in shops, they have a system, they have a strategy, and they know how to deal with the staff effectively. They build that rapport.
Yeah, and I think a lot depends on where you live as well. If you lived in some, London or Manchester or, one of the major cities where you've got bookmakers, so many in a close proximity, I think it'd be a lot easier. Whereas near me, we've only really got 2 or 3 shops and they're not massive, it's just typical locals, your OAPs and stuff. So if you turn up wanting a couple of £100 on one, the suspicions get aroused straight away and stuff. So yeah, I hate all that awkwardness of asking questions, over the phone. You can see them working away, going through. Like I've had it in Paddy Power near me in town once when I tried to get some bets on, and I just thought, no, it's not the hassle that I can be bothered with. So I'd rather just reduce my stakes. And sometimes even on accounts where you've been restricted towards the off, they'll let you have greater amounts on closer to the off, even without having to resort to having to take an SP. So yeah, I've just over the years, I've just come to accept it really. In the future, I'll just continue to lower my stakes, and as long as I can get something on, I'll continue to bet and go through it. But yeah, it is almost a job in itself, getting the bets on as much as researching, isn't it? And yeah, but it's the same for a lot of people nowadays, and I'm sure we'll probably touch upon, the future of betting, but you've also got like the affordability checks and things now, which make getting bets online even more trickier.
Exactly. Yeah, I think, like you say, it's a job in itself, and from my perspective, it really depends upon how much of a bonus you derive from it, how much income you make from it. If you're a small staking punter and you're making a few £100 and you're getting restricted, well, are you really going to go to the lengths to maybe get around that? But then if you're making 5-10 grand per account, for example, or significant fees, it's in your interests to kind of financially to explore the options in front of you. So yeah, it really depends upon your kind of approach to it all. And obviously you touched on there about the changes, and being someone that worked as a racing journalist within the industry, I'm always curious to know what's the thinking there, in terms of how the current setup, because, there's a lot of change going on. The gambling in the UK is not fit for purpose. It's an outdated model based on the modern betting world that we live in. But there's this disconnect, isn't there, between, the enjoyment of racing for so many people and the fact they can't get a bet on. So someone like you or many of your members who are racing enthusiasts, type of people who maybe will go to race days or subscribe to newspapers or websites or, just contribute to the racing economy, are getting kind of frozen out because they can't get a bet on. Is there a concern of that in the journalistic world of the racing side, or is it just kind of people shrug their shoulders and just say, we're at the behest of bookmakers and what they want?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is people just sort of turn a blind eye to it, because at the end of the day, we used to write content for a newspaper, and that newspaper was supported through bookmaker adverts and sponsorship. So, you could never take to social media and rant them, because it makes me laugh when I see some of the offers. I'm sure so many of your readers and listeners will, they'll have the same. You see these price promotions. I see it with the football especially, but then it's like a £10 staking limit maximum. And even then when you go on, like Paddy Powers with mine, I tried to get a few on in the Euros just for like a casual interest on a game, I just want a tenner on that special. And they're knocking you back for like £2. And Sky Bet are terrible for it, obviously, everyone knows that. And I think people they've just sort of come to accept it really, that's just the way it is in terms of the restrictions and closures. And when you go in racing and things, obviously you can have a bet on track, but again, I find that completely demoralising. Like the other week, I went to watch one of my horses, Mystery Angel, run at Haydock, and the place terms were rubbish. And by the time you've got to track and everything, price has gone. I think she was 5-1 in the morning with 3 places each way. when I went to back her just half an hour before the off with some cash, there might have possibly been a non-runner, but the place terms have been reduced. And she was like 3-1 then. And it's like, well, I wish I'd have made more effort to get on online. That's not really been an issue, obviously, with a lockdown, not being able to go racing for so long. So, yeah, I think you just kind of, people in racing just accept that that's the way it's going. I mean, in an ideal world, I wish we could impose like the minimum lay limits like they do in Australia, which I know the SBC, you were big on that in leading, for change and things.
Yeah.
I think it should be a condition of the license, shouldn't it? Even if it's like £500 or something, just be prepared to take a bet or don't be granted a license. But how close we are to introducing something like that in Britain, I have no idea, really.
Yeah, is there a fear for the future of a sport like racing, because it's so intertwined with betting? If continued to kind of go this way, where people are becoming alienated, because, like I say, there's from my experience, well, I've invited people onto the podcast or to be featured, and they can't do it because they work for a firm that works more with bookmakers, and so they can't. They want to, or they there's an interest from them, but at the same time, it's the company that pays their bills and pays their salary. They can't upset, and so it's that kind of shrug of the shoulders, and the bookmakers control the power levers. And but is there the fear then? So that's my original point there. Is there a fear that unless something changes with the structure, or like I say, lay liability of some kind, that it'll just become more and more kind of just dwindle away a little bit and become less of a prominent sport?
I think so, yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why I've taken a career change now, in terms of, I've worked in horse racing for just over 10 years, and I decided I just wanted to get out, really. I mean, when they started talking about the affordability checks, that just set alarm bells ringing in my head, and subsequently moved back into science, which is where my qualifications are. My ambition is still to run Northern Monkey Punter and keep going. I had it would have been May time, it was around about Eurovision, so I like to have a bet on Eurovision. And I'd just done a couple of £100 deposits, so well within the scope of a betting bank. And they started asking me for, evidence of income. And obviously that hasn't been made legal requirement yet. Yet certain firms are going out and asking punters to provide that. This was a small online firm. And I said to him, sorry, I'm not willing to provide that information. And I just closed the account. So that was another avenue shut. And I mean, if some of the bigger high street firms were to introduce limits like that, that would be a real killer. Because, my understanding of it is, say you deposit lots of £100 during a week, even if you win £1,000 at the end of that week, rather than looking at you making a net profit of 500, they'll view it as a £500 loss. If I've understood it correctly. Now, a lot of people who have a side betting bank can comfortably afford bets of £100, 5 lots of £100. But if they're doing it around a full-time job, they might only be earning 20, 25 grand in their, like a national average amount. Under the sort of affordability checks, they would be viewed as problem gamblers, and those sort of stakes wouldn't be allowed. They'd be knocked down to much less. So that would be a major concern for me going forward. So the main reason why I changed careers was because the job that I was in, it had no career progression, and I felt like I was stuck in a dead-end job. But yeah, it did sort of open my eyes a bit when they were talking of the gambling review, and we were all filling out those surveys. The SBC and yourself were very good at making that point that, like the casino betting and fixed odds betting shouldn't be viewed equally to the sports betting and things. Because obviously the online, the FOBTs in the shop were a major problem, weren't they? And it just seems a bit of a half-baked way that they've approached it. Like, I mean, it makes me laugh when you go in a shop now, and the people that used to spin on the roulette tables and stuff, they're limited to £2 a spin. But yet they can stand on the doorstep to that shop using, well, if the shop's got a Wi-Fi connection, if they can tap into that, or even just use their own, and bet on that company's website online and spin 50 quid a spin. So they've only half tackled the issue. It worries me slightly. These are some of the people that you've got leading the review and that are going to be informing policy. Do they really know what they're doing? We've just got to hope for the best and hope that some common sense prevails at some point.
I totally agree. Yes, and I think there's many people who are quite rightly a little bit cynical about it. But like I say, we have to hope that whoever, I know there's been significant changes subsequent to like the petition that we put forward, like you were talking about, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater with the review in terms of, widespread affordability checks on everybody. And there has been a lot of change since then. I know we've had Football Index that's collapsed, and then we've had apparently the unconnected removal of the chair of the Gambling Commission. And so there's a lot of change coming. So let's just hope that, opinions from people like ourselves and others in the industry are listened to. Otherwise, I fear that we might be talking again in a couple of years and we haven't seen any progress. And so let's wrap things up on a positive note, though. And let's talk about your plans, for the service moving forward. Obviously, it's the 12th year of operation. And what are you thinking of, for the next, maybe not 12 years, but next 12 months? Is it much more of the same, or any plans to expand, or what have you got on the horizon?
Yeah, I'm just basically waiting for this. Like I say, we usually have a traditional summer boom where, history would suggest we could make anything between 60, maybe even up to 100 points in the space of a couple of months, and that sort of sets us right for the year. And then towards the autumn, we sort of taper off the stakes and wind down then for the winter. But I'm just waiting for that period to hit. So sort of last year, I started to invest in a couple of horses, only small syndicate shares, and this year I've got a few more. I've got about a dozen now in total. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of those. I've got 7 that are unraced that I haven't taken to the track yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing them, and hopefully we'll get a few bets out on them that we can land on record. Because that's sort of added in a new element to the service, because 2-year-old races are an area that I would normally cover. But since being involved with the likes of Dan Dalla, and I had Mystery Angel last year, who she went on to finish second in the Oaks at Epsom this year at 50-1. Seeing her mature as a 3-year-old's been brilliant to see. And some on the flip side, I've got a couple of rogues that have flopped when I've tipped them up on the service. But Dan Dalla last year was the main one in terms of landing all those multiples. I think we had in her about 4 or 5 multiples and a big strong single on her when she won the Albany. This year we've had Oscula, who won the Woodcote on Oaks Day as well, landed a nice bit of profit off her. I had her in a double with Mystery Angel that day, an each way double, and I think Oscula returned 15-2 at SP, and Mystery Angel returned 50, so it would have been a welter double if that had come off. She was well beaten by Snowfall, who's probably one of the most impressive Oaks winners, well, probably in my lifetime anyway. And I think she's running in the Curragh equivalent this weekend, actually, Snowfall. But yeah, so just more of the same, really. I'll still be. My main focus is going to be the flat as ever, sprint handicaps especially, and yeah, just focusing on the main weekend racing and the summer festivals, because that's just, I like the better quality racing more, and it's easier to get the bets on. You've got stronger anti-post markets set up because the prices are up from earlier in the week. Last year we made. Well, I keep 2 profit and loss totals now. So to top prices, we made 126 points profit. To bottom prices, 66, I think it was. If we could get anything close to like those figures this year, it's probably a bit of a push. But the aim every year that I have is to try and double an 80-point betting bank. And based on my history, it's realistic to aim for a 10% return on investment. So I try and turn over, near on 800 points over the year to try and generate that 80 points. At the minute, we're, like I say, probably round about, well, just above breaking even, I think, as up to the last update. So we're looking to kick on in the next few months will be key, really. Yeah, just we'll see what the rest of the summer brings. Glorious Goodwoods are usually an enjoyable festival for the service. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Especially with crowds back, I think it's a few days' time from the recording this podcast, but probably by the time this is out, crowds will be back in full. So, good atmospheres, and obviously people are able to go racing, and a little bit of normality, and hopefully a few bits of profit for you. Another big double, another Dandula equivalent that kicks in. I remember seeing that last year and noting how well you did over that period. So, thank you so much for coming on, Wayne, and sharing your expertise. How can people find out more if they want to explore your service or to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the website's got all the service information on. So that's www.northernmonkeypunter.co.uk. Or if anyone's got any email questions, just pop me one. That's nmpselections@gmail.com. But yeah, thanks, Pete, for having us on.
Oh, pleasure to finally to speak to you and explore more on your service. And I was going to say as well, I think if you're a Smart Betting Club member, there's a 2-week free trial as well of Northern Monkey. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, there's a link somewhere from your website. But yeah, if members just pop me an email, or you can go through, there's a Hotmail address that I also use that's linked on my website. If you just pop me a message and put in the subject header, you want a free 2-week trial, you can arrange that at any point, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think on the tips to savings section of our members area, if you're a member, log in, click on that and all the details are on there, or you can follow, send an email as you just say there, but well worth a try. I feel like it's a great service, and, to make a profit consistently for such a long period of time, you've clearly got a distinct edge. And I look forward to seeing, maybe another 12 years worth of profitability from you, Wayne. And thanks ever so much for giving up your time today. And please do go and check out Wayne's service.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this very latest Smart Betting Club podcast. If you enjoyed it and are keen to find out more on how the SBC service can help you and your betting, you can save 5% on the cost of membership simply by using the coupon code PODCAST. Visit smartbettingclub.com, hit subscribe, and enter the coupon code PODCAST to save 5%.